and welcome to the Institute for Natural Medicine's podcast, The MD Will See You Now. In this podcast, we talk to naturopathic doctors all across North America about their whole person approach to health, what patients can expect, and why their work is so very vital to patient health. I'm your host, Anna-Liza, and today I'm just thrilled to welcome naturopathic Dr. Lachlan Crawford to the podcast. Now, Lachlan addresses the root causes of mental health using patient-centered integrative medicine, and Dr. Crawford is a licensed naturopathic doctor in both California and Ontario, Canada. Further to that, she's the Director of Integrative Medicine at Walden Behavioral Care, which is an inpatient and residential facility for eating disorders and psychiatric conditions in New England. If that wasn't enough, she also sits on the board of the Psychiatric Association of Naturopathic Physicians, often known as Psych A&P, and she's a founder of Water and Wood, a lifestyle and mental health retreat organization which hosts retreats in the beautiful Canadian wilderness. Thanks so much for joining us today, Dr. Crawford.
Thank you for having me here, Anna-Liza.
So, Dr. Crawford, as I mentioned, you are dedicated to helping people improve their mental health by using an integrative approach. And what are you integrating here? Well, a few things. You're incorporating naturopathic medicine, conventional medicine, but you're also bringing in movement, i.e. exercise, and also spending time outdoors. And today, although of course I know you can speak to a wide range of mental health conditions, what I'd like to focus on today is something that it's an often overlooked mental health condition. It's often misunderstood. Nonetheless, it has been rising during the pandemic, and that is eating disorders and disordered eating. Now, when we think about this, eating is a fairly straightforward activity in theory. Food gives us fuel to function, right? But we all know this isn't the whole story here. We may eat when we're bored, when we're stressed, anxious, depressed, insert emotion here. So it's really not just a matter of, somebody eating too much or not enough. And before we get into how you might approach this from an integrative medicine perspective, let's back up a little bit and think about the root causes. So can you get into that a little bit with us, Dr. Crawford? What root causes in your experience may actually contribute to eating disorders?
It's a great question. Well, first, when I think about eating disorders, they're really a multifaceted group of disorders that have multifaceted causes. We have anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, ARFID, which is avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, binge eating disorder, night eating syndrome, and others. And we also have subtypes of those as well. And each one has various profiles of things that tend to contribute to their particular symptom or behavioral picture. So really, there's no one answer, but I'll go through, a number of contributing factors that can contribute to any of these. So also, like other mental health conditions, it also has genetic and environmental or acquired risk factors that we collect through life, if you will. So to start off, some of the more expected root causes would be, things that we think about, like socialization of body standards, either by family, friends, social media is a big one, of course, or general culture, or perhaps being a part of a group of a population that tends to have higher eating disorder rates, like athletes, for example. I talked about genetic factors as well. So genetic risk factors can include having a family history of eating disorders, but also for some comorbid mental health conditions like anxiety, OCD, and depression that can all contribute to the eventual development of an eating disorder. Something we're certainly paying more attention to these days is that trauma is an important risk factor to be aware of. Especially because, of course, direct trauma can increase risk of an eating disorder. This is especially known for eating disorders that start in adolescence. There was a really fabulous study that just came out in this year by Dr. Tim Brewerton that looked at the correlation between PTSD and eating disorder symptoms arising in adolescence. So it's an important thing for us to look at. But also the effects of trauma the effects of trauma that are experienced by parents can also be passed down to children simply through epigenetic modifications of the stress response system. So we need to be aware of trauma, experiences in the history of the family and in the individual themselves. We see trauma being a part of the eating disorder picture more with more chronic and severe cases, but they can be at any level of care, any severity of the condition. Importantly, it would not be a complete answer if I didn't talk about nutritional deficiencies. This is something certainly through the integrative lens that I look at. So these can be contributors to eating disorders. Here I'm mostly talking about zinc, essential fatty acids, B vitamins, minerals, in some cases lithium, and a number of other nutritional deficiencies that can contribute to the psychiatric and behavioral symptom pictures of eating disorders. And finally, I'm thinking about the range of eating disorders. We think that, all of these would contribute to any of the actual eating disorder behaviors. But when I think about ARFID, the avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, this is something that we're seeing more of and we're studying more, certainly. We're starting to learn that people who struggle with ARFID can also struggle with sensory overwhelm and sensory overstimulation and processing disorders. So that can be a part of the development of some avoidant restrictive food intake disorder as well.
Well, that was a lot of factors and really different factors too, right? So this is really interesting. Some of these factors are, as you said, it could be genetic, it could be environmental, it could be socialization based. You point to social media in particular, certainly, which these days is an important factor. And as you mentioned, nutritional deficiencies can also come into this in addition to interacting with that trauma response. So thanks for that. This gives us a much better sense of really the complexity of these issues. And it really is not just a straight cause and effect kind of situation. So that being said, Dr. Crawford, now that we have a better sense of what some of these root causes may be, can you give us a sense, and of course, we're keeping in mind here that each patient in front of you is a unique individual and there's no, one size fits all answer here, but thinking about those root causes that you just mentioned, can you give us a sense of how you might approach addressing eating disorders using that integrative medical perspective that you mentioned? And also, how is naturopathic medicine factoring into that?
Absolutely. Yeah. When I think about this, naturopathic medicine is one of the modalities that are included in the whole umbrella of integrative modalities that I might use. And certainly one of the very first things that I would think about when I'm treating a patient who's been struggling with disordered eating or a diagnosis of an eating disorder is really to get to know the person and to really understand what are their fears or beliefs that drive behaviors. Certainly we don't recommend any changes in diet until we really can get a handle on understanding some of the core beliefs that are driving those behaviors, like I said. So that's a really good thing. I really appreciate that as a naturopathic doctor, I have an extended amount of time with my patient to really get to know and to screen, right? If someone's coming in for general practice, to also screen for anybody who has a history of disordered eating that I might really want to be aware of and sensitive to when I'm prescribing anything, for example. So that's the first piece, is to really get to know the patient and spend time with them. And then when we get into the naturopathic medicine modalities, again, when we're looking at root cause, we need to know what are the mental health comorbidities that could be driving it. So we need to know, are there OCD behaviors that are driving this? Is there just an extreme amount of anxiety that's driving the behaviors? Is there trauma that needs to be processed? And then, of course, we refer appropriately. If I can't do all of that work myself, I'm not a family-based therapist myself. I'm not somebody who could do in-depth trauma work. So I really make sure that I'm working with a team to really address those root causes. That's so essential to my mind when I look at eating disorders. And then, of course, like I mentioned with the causative factors, I look at nutritional deficiencies. So I will do testing. Sometimes we can start some repleting nutritional regimens before we do the testing, because there are some pretty standard nutritional deficiencies, but definitely testing and really getting to know, as you said, each person is an individual and we need to know what their deficiencies are that could be contributing to their behaviors. So in addition to nutritional deficiencies, I might track blood sugar over the course of a day, because that sometimes can drive feelings of anxiety, feelings of cravings, feelings of avoidance, feelings of stress when they're eating. So really paying attention to blood glucose levels. And one thing that I think has been really wonderful to bring into my practice more in recent years is to think about the gut lining of the gut as an essential organ within our health that drives mental health as well. So we're learning a lot about the gut-brain axis and how things that are happening in the gut affect the brain and how the brain affects things that are happening in the gut as well. So really working with helping to heal the gut lining if there's been any injury there, if there's any history of an autoimmune condition or some sort of digestive issue, looking at that, seeing if there is a root cause that we need to heal, and then really supporting the gut microbiome as well through food, through probiotics, through prebiotics, whatever combination is going to work for that person, really making sure that we take that into consideration as well, the gut lining. And I think about, certainly with my role here as Director of Integrative Medicine at Walden Behavioral Care, we have a whole program that really looks at the person as a whole. So we incorporate gentle exercise when it's appropriate. When someone's at a stage of an eating disorder, when they're able to reincorporate gentle movement, being aware of, over-exercise is a behavior within some eating disorders. So really making sure that we're being honest and checking to make sure that any movement we're doing isn't contributing to the eating disorder itself again. So working in gentle movement, some yoga, going for walks. Another tool that I use quite often is heart rate variability biofeedback. And this is something that I absolutely love. So we use the heart rate sensors through HeartMath. And this is something that patients can do at home. If you do it with a practitioner, it's a really wonderful tool that teaches self-regulation. So essentially you're using a very simple heart rate monitor, and it gives a visual display of what's going on for your nervous system. And you get to learn what helps you regulate your own internal nervous system so that you can gain an internal locus of control for understanding, like, hey, when I'm feeling stressed, I have the ability to calm myself down. And that can go a long way when we're talking about anxiety and OCD and compulsions contributing to behaviors within an eating disorder. So these are all sorts of integrative tools that I really like to use. And it's really important to note that for some people, if they have comorbid mental health, conditions happening at the same time, maybe it's the mental health that started first that's contributing to the eating disorder. Maybe it's the eating disorder that contributes to the mental health, but all of that needs to be a part of the conversation. So the integration of all of these tools is really important, which is why I love the naturopathic and integrative approach to eating disorders.
Well said, Dr. Crawford. It's there's so much in there that you've mentioned about what the integrative approach can really bring, to people that are having these struggles with eating disorders and disordered eating. You've mentioned that, it's that time that naturopathic doctors are spending really getting to know that patient, getting to know what's going on with them, past and present, might I say. You've also mentioned the importance of working as a team, right? So surely one individual can work integratively, as you mentioned, by using these different modalities, but that's another really nice extra layer of integration where you're using integrative medicine, integrating that within a team where each healthcare practitioner is able to bring their individual skills, knowledge, and experience to the table, right, for the benefit Absolutely. Of that patient. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this gut lining issue, because this is something that I think may be a surprise to some people. And you have drawn our attention to the importance of the gut-brain axis. There's a lot going on there, right? In this I'm going to call it a conversation, that the gut and the brain are having, a lot of things going back and forth. And I agree with you. There is a lot of research out there, certainly encouraging our listeners to go ahead and seek out that research, and educate yourself on how what's going on in our gut really is impacting not only mental health, other aspects of health, but mental health in particular. There's just so much there to work with. So to end today, Dr. Crawford, we've talked about the root causes. We've talked about how you might approach this. I realize, of course, that we may have people listening to us today who perhaps they themselves are struggling with disordered eating or an eating disorder, or maybe it's somebody that they know and care about, a neighbor, a family member, a friend, a colleague. So to end today, Dr. Crawford, if we do have such individuals in our listening audience today, maybe thinking about either themselves or recommending that their loved ones see a naturopathic doctor to help them address an eating disorder, but maybe they're hesitant about seeing a naturopathic doctor for that. What would you say, Dr. Crawford, to somebody who is having these experiences, but also having these concerns?
Yeah, thank you. It's really lovely to get a chance to speak to individuals directly sometimes. And I think one of the biggest things I think is important to talk about with eating disorders is that it's often hard to reach out and get help. Right? There is a lot of stigma around eating disorders. And sometimes the eating disorder can feel like it's helping solve problems. And it's what we call in the medical world, it's called ego syntonic, which means that it's acting like it's helping you solve all your problems, when really the eating disorder is something that is a maladaptive coping mechanism. So the message I want to say is that when you are thinking about reaching out and getting help, it feels scary because it feels like you're giving up an important coping mechanism or something that has helped you in the past manage feelings or manage physiology or whatever it might be. And it's really important to know that there are tools and skills that can help you absolutely not just manage without it, but thrive without it. And you can do that with the help of a team. If you trust them and you go in and you understand that there are people who are really trained well to help people thrive when they start to let go of their eating disorder behaviors and some of those symptoms. And also that, the anxiety or the depression or some of the other feelings that are alongside the eating disorder, it makes it just like a tricky thing to address, but there are people out there that are trained. So I think that's the main first thing that I want to say. Second, importantly, is that eating disorders don't have to look a certain way. All eating disorders look different. Your body doesn't have to look a certain way. Your behaviors don't have to look a certain way. Your feelings don't have to look a certain way. If you are thinking that you might need some help or you want to talk to somebody about your relationship to food, then I think, something that we say in my day-to-day work here is that you deserve help. You are, quote unquote, sick enough is what we say. You are in a state where you deserve help. If you want to have that conversation, then please do reach out. I know that it's scary to do. And if you do want to go to a naturopathic doctor, I think it is important to have a conversation with them to make sure that they're a right fit for having those conversations around your relationship with food. So maybe it's a good thing to ask if they've worked with folks who have struggled with eating disorders or disordered eating before. And there are some formal trainings that doctors and other practitioners can have, such as the CEDS, which would be letters after their name, that stands for Certified Eating Disorder Specialist. So you can look for those letters. You can look for people that have done trainings through national organizations like MEDA or the National Eating Disorder Association. And so I think it's good to look out for folks that have an understanding of what it takes to work with an eating disorder. All naturopathic doctors are trained and board certified, but it helps to have somebody who might have had that experience to be really eating disorder informed, is what we say. So thank you for that opportunity to speak directly to those folks. I think it's always good to do.
Oh, we're very happy to give you that opportunity. And I want to thank you, Dr. Crawford, for bringing our attention to what is actually a very central issue in eating disorders, which is the fact that, as you refer to it, it is a maladaptive coping mechanism. And I think that when family, friends, colleagues, neighbors, whatnot, are seeing somebody struggling with an eating disorder, it can be very mystifying to them to figure out what's going on and why they can't just solve it, either eat, don't eat, like it seems so simple to them. But when you frame it and think about it in that context, as far as that person is concerned, this is what's getting them through life. This is the thing that's actually helping them. Yet at the same time, it can be something that, as we know, is so very, very destructive, both to an individual's all aspects of health and, even to their relationships and those around them. So I really appreciate you just bringing us back to that very, very central and important point, that, it really is a maladaptive coping mechanism. And hopefully that helps people understand that approach with somebody that is suffering from these conditions a little bit better. Well, Dr. Crawford, there's much more to say, but that is all the time we have for today. So I want to thank you for taking us through this really, really complex topic and really demystifying some of these key pieces for us. You've given us quite a good sense of what some of the potential root causes of eating disorders may be, about what an integrative approach might look like, and also you've given us some great tips for if somebody is thinking of seeing a naturopathic doctor for disordered eating or an eating disorder. We have some great tips there. Now, listeners, you may be wondering, where can you find a transcript of this interview and links to learn more about Dr. Crawford's work? Please check out the podcast notes. It's all there for you. And Dr. Crawford, do you have any final thoughts to leave us with today?
Just tell folks that they deserve the care that a naturopath and other practitioners can give them. You deserve care. That's what I'd like to leave them with.
Well said. You deserve care. You deserve care. Perfect place to end it. And everyone, thanks for joining us. Dr. Crawford, thanks for joining us as well. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much.